Hi there. Welcome to the Computer Science Professional Development video series. This is series number 2 on the essential concepts in the computer science standards. This fifth video is on the impacts of computing overarching concept. My name is Dan Schneider. I'm a high school computer science teacher here in Arizona, and I'm a member of the Arizona chapter of the Computer Science Teachers Association. So first, an overview. The Arizona Computer Science Standards are organized into 5 overarching concepts that span all grade levels. Today, we'll be focusing only on the impacts of computing concept. When reading the standards themselves, they are organized first by grade level, then by concept, then by subconcept, and lastly by identifying number. In this video, we'll only be focusing on the impacts of computing concept. Our goals today are to understand the impacts of computing core concept and see how its 3 subconcepts, culture, social interactions, and safety law and ethics, are integrated throughout the entire K-12 student experience. We'll look at example standards in K-5, 6-8, and 9-12, with a focus on how this concept progresses through grade levels. We'll also look at ways that teachers may already be emphasizing these concepts in their classrooms and examine resources and lesson ideas that teachers can use to teach this concept. So let's start with a broad overview. What do we mean by impacts of computing? Well, as technology becomes more and more ubiquitous, we can begin to reflect and analyze on the ways technology is already impacting our lives. We can do this at a personal and individualistic level, examining the ways technology is impacting our own daily lives and our own communities. We can also look at this at a more global societal level, examining patterns and trends with how we interact as a society and how technology has the ability to both amplify and silence ideas, communities, and sometimes entire cultures. Discussing these impacts is fertile ground for research, debate, and personal reflection by our students. They provide an exciting opportunity to invite students to bring their own experiences and their own interests into the classroom, then see how technology is impacting these areas. It also provides opportunities for empathy and empathizing with the experience of other people in other communities as technology is impacting their lives, both for better and worse, intended and unintended. For example, we can consider the impact that access to technology has had on society, culture, and the economy. This can include revolutionary beneficiary effects, such as the educational benefits when an impoverished community was given access to the internet for the first time, as well as cautionary long-term effects, such as the impact that automation could have on the economies of local communities. Even though these 2 examples may not directly impact our particular students, and depending on when you watch these videos, these examples may be extremely out of date, we can still ask our students to empathize with these 2 communities and begin to see patterns in how technology is both positively and negatively impacting groups around the world. Students can also examine the ways technology can enable creativity, amplify speech, and empower individuals towards their personal pursuits. For example, students examine how technology can foster creativity and new forms of personal expression, such as using artificial intelligence as a collaborator on composing music or developing art displays. However, just as technology can be a catalyst for creativity, we also look at the unintended consequences of this enforcement and regulation of the same technology and how this may stifle creativity or even be used for censorship. We see issues of copyright and appropriate use of digital materials embedded in these standards, especially at the early grades. These standards also allow students to investigate how technology is impacting their own interests, especially potential careers. For example, students can investigate the intersection of technology and medical fields, such as this story about how artificial intelligence is making breakthroughs with cancer recognition. More generally, current events provide great examples for students to research how technology is impacting fields they care about. Similarly, current events also provide insight into some of the unintended effects of this technology, especially in the areas of bias and accessibility. For example, the same artificial intelligence technology that benefits the medical field is also responsible for racial bias in facial recognition software. More generally, current events and news articles allow students to empathize and discuss ways that technology is impacting not just their own community, but other communities and cultures around the world. So here is a more general summary of the impacts of computing concept, which is also provided in the state standards. This concept is broken down into its 3 additional subconcepts, also listed here. Brief descriptions of these subconcepts is provided here and in the standards. I won't take time to read these out loud, but feel free to pause this video and read through these summaries on your own in order to see how these subconcepts are first introduced and progress through the grade levels. Great. Let's start by looking at some standards in the beginning grade levels. I've selected 2 standards from grade 1. Generally speaking, the early grade levels focus on the social interactions and safety subconcept. This includes awareness of how we are using technology with others and how we can protect our personal information from a safety perspective. Many of these standards are typically already embedded in classroom behavior routines or social emotional learning initiatives when working with younger students, especially as they are first introduced to technology to complete assignments or solve problems. This focus on awareness helps scaffold to later standards where students analyze the broader impacts of technology on social and cultural interactions. But it starts here with a focus on awareness. Many of these standards can be incorporated into work you are probably already doing, but another useful resource is the K5 is Not Just Coding repository of lessons and resources. If there's a particular standard that seems too disconnected from the work already happening in the classroom, this website is a great resource for how you can incorporate those other standards more intentionally in your classroom. In upper elementary, students focus more on the impacts technology has had on how we participate in society and use technology responsibly, which provides several opportunities to embed these standards into other subject areas. In third grade, we see a standard involving collaboration and how it can facilitate communication and innovation. In fact, throughout upper elementary, students are asked to consider how technology can be used as a collaborative tool, bridging gaps between communities and opening dialogues from a diverse group of participants. Opportunities for these types of discussions may already be present in your classroom, especially considering what opportunities your students have to communicate across large distances thanks to technology, or moments where your students are able to learn from diverse viewpoints or underrepresented voices thanks to the power of technology. In fourth grade, we see a standard emphasizing an awareness of how technology has changed the world. More broadly, in upper elementary, students are asked to form an awareness of these larger impacts on our modern society. This includes from a big picture macro perspective, the impact on these larger communities, as well as a micro individual perspective, thinking about how shifts in technology have influenced their own community. There are plenty of opportunities to incorporate written projects or oral histories from community members as a way to navigate these standards while also emphasizing ELA standards and community engagement. In fifth grade, we see a standard emphasizing responsible use of digital materials and copyright. And more broadly, this subconcept of safety, law, and ethics manifests itself with our first understanding of copyright. This can mean citing sources and attribution, but it doesn't have to be in a more formal academic setting. It can instead mean citing an audio clip or an image file used in presentations. These standards also tend to overlap with digital citizenship efforts, usually already present in elementary school. These standards, though, eventually evolve into considering the larger cultural effects of copyright, including the potential of using copyright for censorship or retribution. A great resource at this level has been put together by the Gilbert Public Schools and includes activities for each standard broken down by grade level, as well as advice for how to tweak activities you are probably already doing so they meet these standards. In middle school, students begin analyzing the human aspect of technology. Technology is designed by and affects humanity in both positive and negative ways, intentionally and unintentionally. In sixth grade, students examine potential bias and issues of accessibility in existing technology. More broadly, middle school students will turn a critical eye to the technology they use from different viewpoints and lenses. Developing empathy for a wide variety of users is a key aspect of these standards, especially considering the unintended effects of bias in technology or the lack of accessibility in many of our digital devices. Issues of sampling and bias can connect with math or science classes when designing experiments or surveys and probabilities. And developing student empathy can support a variety of socio-emotional learning initiatives within schools. In seventh grade, students extend their awareness of technology from earlier grades and now consider the effects of these technologies, both positive and negative. More broadly, students throughout middle school are asked to consider the gray areas of technology, hopefully drawing from their own experiences as they've matured from elementary school, allowing them to speak to both the positive and negative trends they've witnessed in their own lifetimes and in their own communities. Reflecting on these gray areas of technology lend themselves well to ELA activities, especially persuasive writing. Finally, in eighth grade, we consider the trade-offs with sharing information online. And more broadly, middle school students become more aware of their personal standards for privacy and the risks involved with sharing information online. This again ties into digital citizenship efforts that schools may be participating in, while also continuing the theme of considering both sides of the situation, both the benefits of sharing information online, such as communicating with families in other areas, along with the risks. A useful resource throughout middle school is the Google set of lessons and activities titled Be Internet Awesome. These activities are aligned with state standards and include lesson plans for teachers to implement in their classes. At the high school level, students focus on how technology impacts communities at different levels, noticing when there are discrepancies between how a community or culture benefits from a piece of technology, possibly at the expense of other communities. In particular, students take on the role of a designer of technology and consider potential bias or deficits that may be inherent in a design process, especially with an eye for accessibility or inequitable outcomes. Lastly, students focus on personal data and privacy and how the mass aggregation of data impacts how we experience technology and the internet. Especially at the high school level, students can bring in their own experience of using apps and programs with varying privacy policies, or reflect on moments when they've had to supply their own personal information and consider how that information is used. For example, the level of personal information required to apply for a scholarship compared to what that scholarship is actually providing. An incredible resource for these standards is the Ethical CS collection of resources, lessons, and teacher community. These lessons and activities draw on ethical considerations of technology and provide discussion and written prompts for students to reflect on collaboratively, putting themselves in positions of designers and deciders when considering the impacts of technology. From these roles of designer and decider, there are several projects students can complete in order to show mastery of these standards. For example, they could pick a piece of technology and audit it for issues of accessibility, referring to different accessibility standards, or even performing user interviews to determine any unintentional deficits in a product. Similarly, students can audit the privacy policies of an app or program that they use, comparing it to similar apps and providing their own personal rating and recommendation for other students. So we reached the end of the video. Thanks for following along with me. As a reminder, here are our goals for today. Hopefully you have a more firm understanding of how the impacts of computing concept is developed throughout the Arizona State Computer Science Standards, along with examples of specific standards and access to additional resources. Speaking of which, we have a list of, in addition to the individual resources listed earlier in this presentation, there are several general resources that may be useful for diving deeper into teaching these standards. We're grateful for the work of other organizations here in Arizona, as well as around the nation, for curating and sharing these teacher-vetted resources and strategies. We have resources collected by the Arizona Department of Education, including the resources from the Gilbert Public Schools mentioned before. We have the Computer Science Teachers Association of Arizona, which lists news and updates and professional development events that may be relevant to teaching computer science. We have the work of CS in San Francisco, which has a collection of curricula and resources for all levels of computer science. We also have the New York City CS for All Blueprint website, which includes pedagogy techniques, including videos and sample curricula that could be used at all grade levels. And finally, the CS Unplugged website, which is a classic set of resources to implement computer science, even if you don't have computers. So with that, happy teaching.